Three men stood as one unit, but only one design question decided which of them could survive the split. Roman Reigns launched Ryback and Randy Orton through tables at 6'3" and 265 pounds. A former Georgia Tech defensive tackle turned into a human wrecking ball. Seth Rollins turned that force into strategy, and Dean Ambrose turned strategy into chaos nobody could predict. A volatility that eventually split his own identity in two. That's why today I'm breaking down all three members of the Shield and what each role actually meant, starting with the one built purely to hit Roman Reigns. Here's a hot take. Roman Reigns was the muscle. Some viewers saw him as the brute, the meathead, the guy standing there so the other two could be interesting, while others read him differently, tracking exactly what made him the Shield's powerhouse and enforcer. That second read is the one that actually holds up, and it's the one that misses the entire reason he was terrifying if you stop at big guy. You need to picture the moment first. Ryback goes through a table. Randy Orton goes through a table. In both cases, the Shield was responsible for the table attack, with Reigns involved in the assault on Orton, and the impact reads less like a wrestling move and more like a car crash somebody choreographed and then filmed at close range. That was the image attached to Reigns as the Shield's powerhouse and enforcer. Whenever the Shield made its signature entrance through the crowd, three guys against one, and Reigns positioned as the exclamation point at the end of the sentence. The other two did the talking. Reigns did the punctuation, and the punctuation put people through furniture. Now look at the numbers behind that image, because those numbers offer one way to frame why Reigns' physical presentation landed so hard. Reigns is listed at 6'3", 265 pounds, which on paper sounds like a big lumbering guy who falls on people for a living. The kind of size that wins fights through sheer mass. Before any of this though, he was a defensive tackle at Georgia Tech, and that background changes what you're actually watching when he moves. They are expected to tackle the running back as close to the line of scrimmage as possible. Watch a Reigns spear from that angle, and it stops looking like a wrestling spot entirely. It looks like a play call, drawn up on a whiteboard, executed on a man's ribs. That combination fits the way Reigns was presented inside the Shield's design, as the powerhouse and enforcer. A 265-pound man who's just heavy is a threat you can see developing, one you might have half a second to brace for or scramble out of the way of. A 265-pound man with a defensive tackle's explosive reputation can look like a threat that gives you less warning. That image helps explain why Ryback and Orton ended up involved in table attacks instead of simply standing on the mat trading holds. The scary part, in this reading, was not the size by itself or the speed by itself. In this reading, the effect was the combination of size and explosiveness. So here's the question worth sitting with once you understand that combination. What happens to that kind of force once the group that framed it splits up? WWE answered fast, and they answered big. 2 years after the Shield disbanded, Reigns beat Triple H at WrestleMania 32 in 2016 and walked out of the building with the WWE World Heavyweight Championship around his waist. That victory was a WWE World Heavyweight Championship win, and WWE elevated him to a major championship spot without a full sequence of smaller title wins documented first. WWE later presented Reigns as a major singles figure, asking whether the same physical presence that made him the Shield's powerhouse could work with him as a singles star. Some fans criticized and debated that singles push, and the argument still shows up in comment sections today. Some viewers felt WWE rushed him, handing him a level of authority his character had not earned yet, years before the tribal chief persona finally gave that same size and menace a story that actually fit the man carrying it. You can picture the writer's room in real time. Give him the title at WrestleMania. Does he have the character work to back that up yet? The crowd will catch up. Some fans took longer than others to accept Reigns as WWE's central star. Whether or not you buy that criticism, it tells you something the table spots already hinted at back when he was just the third man in a vest. Force alone doesn't decide what a wrestler becomes once he's standing by himself in the spotlight. It just decides how loud the room gets the moment he shows up in it, because that's the piece Reigns' half of the story leaves open, and it's a big piece. Raw power creates the opening, the spear, and the table attack. The championship elevation was a separate step in his singles presentation. But it takes a very different kind of operator to actually read that opening, to see the exact moment a team is about to break and turn that breakup into somebody else's career launch instead of his own. Seth Rollins. A chair shot broke up the Shield, and about 9 months later, Rollins used the opening at WrestleMania 31 to win a championship. Rewind to June 2nd, 2014. Rollins swings a steel chair into the backs of Roman Reigns and Dean Ambrose, walks off, joins the Authority, and it looked like the end of something. What followed was about 9 months between that ugly night and the WrestleMania title victory. That's the part that gets lost when people talk about the betrayal, like it was just cruelty. The chair shot ended one version of Rollins and started another, with the consequences arriving long after the crowd had finished processing the attack. Rollins came into the Shield as the tactician, the guy calling the spots, the one whose job was making Reigns' size and Ambrose's chaos actually function as a machine. WWE later hung the architect on him, and for once, the nickname undersold the resume. By WrestleMania 31, Rollins had already become a WWE champion. This was a man who understood angles before he understood how to throw a punch, and once you know that about him, the chair shot stops looking like a random eruption and starts looking like a major turning point in his career. You don't turn on your own brothers on a whim. You can read the betrayal as a move toward what came next, but the documented sequence does not prove Rollins had mapped every step down to the finish. The documented sequence is cleaner and stranger than a perfect master plan. The betrayal was followed by an authority alignment and, months later, the WrestleMania cash-in. Rollins had a Money in the Bank contract that he could use to enter a title opportunity. That contract is the closest thing WWE has to a loaded gun with a countdown timer strapped to it, and Rollins carried it into the biggest possible moment with the patience of a man waiting beside a very expensive fire alarm. He didn't need to create the match from scratch. He waited for the existing match to become vulnerable before cashing in. WrestleMania 31, March 29, 2015. Brock Lesnar and Roman Reigns are in the WWE Championship main event, both of them wrecked, Reigns bleeding, Lesnar looking like a man who'd rather be anywhere else, and Rollins runs the aisle with the briefcase in hand. He interrupts the title defense while it is still happening. Rollins did not wait for the match to end. WWE's own history of the moment calls it the first time the contract had ever been cashed in during an ongoing title match, which sounds like a technicality until you picture what it actually meant in the room. A two-man war became a three-way scramble mid-bell. No pause, no reset. The referee suddenly refereeing a match he hadn't been booked for 30 seconds earlier. The guy who had spent months carrying the briefcase stood right in the middle of that chaos, holding the opportunity he had been waiting to use, while the champion and challenger were still trying to destroy each other. The timing became the weapon. Lesnar and Reigns were competing in the collision that headlined the show. Reigns brought the force that made the moment worth watching in the first place, while Lesnar brought the kind of physical damage that turns a championship match into an insurance claim. Rollins responded to that collision by entering the match while it was still alive, changing it into a three-way contest and winning the championship. That was the brilliance of the choice, whatever motive existed behind it. Rollins didn't need to start the championship fight from scratch. He entered at the precise point when the existing match had already done the exhausting work for him, then forced the referee, the champion, and the challenger to deal with a completely different contest. A two-man main event became three men fighting over the same belt. That sounds simple when you say it quickly. In practice, it required Rollins to sprint into a live championship match, hand over the briefcase, survive the immediate confusion, and make the new rules of the fight matter before the old ones could return. The ring was already full of momentum. Rollins treated that momentum like a moving vehicle and stepped into traffic anyway. Alright, I guess he must have been confident. He'd go on to add another championship to his resume, which tells you the WrestleMania cash-in had consequences beyond one spectacular entrance. The title victory made the chair attack feel even more significant in retrospect, because the man who walked away from Reigns and Ambrose eventually walked into a championship scene built around the kind of opening only he had recognized. That doesn't prove the betrayal was planned as a detailed 9-month schedule. It does establish the shape of what happened. Rollins attacked his Shield brothers, aligned himself with the authority, secured the Money in the Bank contract, and later entered the active Lesnar-Reigns main event to become champion. The facts arrive in separate pieces, then lock together when you watch the WrestleMania moment again. Some fans view the 2014 betrayal as the smartest career decision of the three members. Others believe Rollins sacrificed the Shield's long-term potential for a short-term storyline and immediate momentum. Both arguments are using the same night as evidence, and the debate survives because the betrayal produced a clear personal payoff while leaving the group's larger future hanging in the air. The first reading has an obvious advantage. Rollins left a dominant trio, joined the faction with institutional power, and eventually used the contract he carried into WrestleMania 31 to take the championship from a match already in progress. The second reading has an equally obvious wound. The Shield had more story left to tell, and the chair shot removed all three men from the same side of the camera before that story could reach a finished ending. That tension is why the moment keeps working. The betrayal feels personal because Reigns and Ambrose are standing beside him when the chair comes down. The payoff feels strategic because Rollins later appears with a briefcase and changes the biggest match on the card. One image gives the audience the wound, the other gives them the receipt. Reigns proved the group could hit like a truck. Rollins showed how a well-timed cash-in could change the collision into a championship victory. A betrayal can change a career, and a cash-in can create a champion, but neither one explains what happens when the man left holding nothing but instinct gets his own shot at both of them at once. Dean Ambrose, Jon Moxley. Dean Ambrose became world champion after watching the other two members of the Shield fight over the same title, and he did it all in one night. Roman Reigns supplied the force, Seth Rollins supplied the strategy, Ambrose supplied the moment where both careers crashed together and left him holding the championship. That sounds like tidy wrestling symmetry, because it is. 3 former brothers, 1 ladder match, 1 title fight, 1 briefcase, and a champion created before the arena could process what happened. The Chaos Roll had finally found the perfect assignment. Stand near the explosion, wait for the smoke, then claim the building. Ambrose can be read as the Shield's pressure point. Roman looked like the unit's muscle. Seth moved like its tactician, and Dean behaved like a man handed a plan purely so he could damage it. Michael Cole called him the Lunatic Fringe, a nickname associated with eccentricity and unpredictable behavior. His real name is Jonathan David Good, and he was born on December 7th, 1985. That detail matters because the distance between Good, Ambrose, and Moxley became part of the story itself. You watched one performer build an identity around reckless instinct, then he later returned to the Jon Moxley name, turning the distance between Good, Ambrose, and Moxley into part of the story. During the Shield's run, Ambrose's appeal came from that unstable balance. He could brawl with a grin, absorb punishment like it was an awkward conversation, and turn a serious stare down into something one bad sentence away from a parking lot incident. You understood Roman's job immediately. Seth's job became clear when the betrayal arrived. Dean made you wonder what his job would become once the group disappeared. That question hung over his singles career. The character had enormous attention built into it, yet the direction could feel surprisingly narrow. Ambrose was loud, physical, funny, strange, and capable of making a crowd believe he might actually do something stupid, which is valuable in professional wrestling and terrible in a corporate meeting. He wanted the world title. You could see it in the way he chased opportunities, absorbed losses, and returned with the same wired energy, as if disappointment had handed him another object to throw. Money in the Bank 2016 gave him the briefcase. That victory carried the emotional weight of a reunion nobody had planned. Ambrose won the ladder match, climbed down with the contract, and suddenly possessed wrestling's cleanest shortcut. Somebody else does the exhausting work, somebody else bleeds through the main event, and you arrive with paperwork. Ambrose had the paperwork. Later that same night, Roman Reigns defended the WWE World Heavyweight Championship against Seth Rollins. The match worked as a collision between the first 2 parts of the Shield's design. Reigns represented the champion's force, the physical presence capable of imposing itself on an entire match. Rollins represented control, timing, movement, and the ability to turn one opening into a career-defining result. Then Rollins defeated Reigns and became champion. For a few seconds, the story belonged to Seth. He had returned from injury, defeated the man who replaced him as the group's central powerhouse, and taken the championship that seemed to confirm Roman's place at the top. You could read the entire betrayal story in that result. Seth's strategy had outmaneuvered Roman's force, and the former Shield members had reached the title through different routes. Then Ambrose's music hit. He ran toward the ring with the briefcase, and the sequence became almost absurdly efficient. Rollins had finished the match. Reigns had lost the championship. Ambrose had won the contract. The cash-in happened immediately, turning the arena into a 3-person argument with a belt in the middle. You have probably seen cash-ins built around surprise, but this one carried the architecture of the entire faction. Roman supplied the target. Seth created the opening. Dean converted both events into his own victory. He pinned Rollins and became WWE World Heavyweight Champion on the same night he won Money in the Bank. That makes the moment larger than a clever cash-in. Ambrose's title win followed Roman's reign, Seth's challenge, Seth's victory, and the briefcase Dean had secured earlier. Together, those 4 events formed the documented sequence that produced Ambrose's title win. The volatile member had become the connective tissue. For you as a viewer, that creates a strange emotional payoff. Ambrose's unpredictability had spent years making him entertaining, but the 2016 sequence gave that instability a structural purpose. He was the person capable of interrupting the expected ending. And the expected ending had been Roman losing to Seth. Ambrose turned their resolution into his arrival. His celebration carried the history of the breakup. Rollins had betrayed the Shield in 2014 with a chair and a carefully chosen target. Reigns had become the group's most visible successor. Some fans saw Ambrose's singles identity as magnetic, but underused. In one night, the betrayer, the replacement, and the wildcard met around the same championship. Some fans still debate how to assess Ambrose's WWE run. The argument gains force from how perfectly that 2016 title sequence connected the 3 former Shield members. If the company could build a single night where all three careers mattered, why did the surrounding run so often feel less focused than the character's potential? The criticism has a specific shape. Fans saw a performer with a unique rhythm, a strange comic instinct, and a willingness to look ridiculous if the moment demanded it. They also saw WWE frame him through catchphrases, eccentric segments, and creative choices that sometimes treated volatility as a costume rather than a weapon. A wild character needs consequences, targets, and a reason for the wildness. Otherwise, chaos becomes decoration, like putting a flamethrower on a desk and calling it office equipment. Ambrose's strongest moments gave his disorder somewhere to go. His weakest moments made the disorder feel like a production note. In April 2019, his WWE contract expired. On May 25, 2019, he returned to the Jon Moxley name and debuted for AEW at Double or Nothing. The presentation changed sharply. Moxley appeared as a harder, more violent, less restricted version of the identity fans associated with him before and during his WWE career. Here, the evidence supports a fan reading, rather than a settled verdict. This evidence packet does not establish which persona expresses Jonathan Good most truthfully, because performance, character, and personal identity overlap without becoming the same thing. The contrast still tells you something useful. Some viewers may read Moxley's freer and more violent presentation as a closer match for the original impulse behind the lunatic fringe, while others preferred Ambrose's theatrical unpredictability and comic instability. You can understand both sides. Moxley looked like a man who had escaped the building and returned with a list of structural complaints. Ambrose looked like the building had hired him to inspect the wiring, then acted surprised when the lights started flickering. Great, add that to the identity crisis. The name change turned his career into a living argument over creative freedom. WWE gave him Dean Ambrose, an unstable force designed to command attention inside a larger machine. The Moxley presentation was more direct and dangerous than the Ambrose presentation, and more comfortable with the consequences of its impulses. You were comparing two answers to the same demand. What happens when a performer built around chaos is asked to become a complete protagonist? Ambrose's 2016 championship win offers one compelling answer because it uses chaos with exact timing. Ambrose didn't need to dominate Reigns or out-wrestle Rollins through a long program. He won the contract, watched the other two finish their title match, and acted before the night was over. That is a role with terrifying efficiency. Force creates the collision. Strategy decides who survives it. Chaos recognizes the half-second when both are exhausted and makes the result personal. The sequence also recontextualizes the breakup itself. Seth's betrayal separated the three parts, while separation created distinct careers that could collide later. Roman became the imposing standard-bearer. Seth became the calculating opportunist. Dean became the unpredictable pressure system capable of passing through both stories and altering the ending. You can trace the entire faction through that cash-in. Roman's physical authority made the championship important. Seth's victory created the opening for Ambrose's cash-in. Dean's instinct made the final result unforgettable. The three roles separated, then returned for one night as cause, opportunity, and consequence. That is why Ambrose carries the emotional core of the Shield's legacy. Roman's path asks whether force can become leadership. Seth's path asks whether strategy can survive betrayal. Dean's path asks whether a volatile identity can receive a purpose large enough to contain it. For a moment, it did. The briefcase was a promise that somebody else's exhaustion could become your opportunity. Ambrose turned it into a reunion, a punchline, and a coronation. You watched him win the contract, watched Rollins defeat Reigns, and watched the faction's history collapse into the space between one bell and the next. That night answered the question the breakup had quietly asked. When the roles split apart, Ambrose showed how a precisely timed intervention could bring the other two stories together and create a third act. The Shield's final proof came through the man who made force and strategy collide, then claimed the title in the space they created. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now.